Hello, for this talk, we'll talk about the first of the six E's, empathy, and how context in Ignatian pedagogy can help us establish empathy in our classroom. The first thing we need to do is try to understand what empathy means. And one way of doing this is by distinguishing it from two other words that are often used synonymously with it. And of course, I'm talking about sympathy and pity. Sometimes people use these words interchangeably, but for the sake of better understanding and appreciation of empathy, it might be good for us to sort of distinguish them from one another. One way of doing that is by looking at them and comparing them in terms of the person's emotional proximity and engagement to the subject of the conversation. The closer you are to the person you're relating to, the more emotionally engaged you are, the more you go up this hierarchy of emotions. So as you can see, pity would be at the bottom. When you feel pity for someone, you might feel bad for the person. Sympathy is a little bit more proximate and a little bit more engaged. But it's only in empathy that we really feel that we are emotionally close and emotionally engaged to the person that we are relating to. So if we base our understanding on this diagram, then we would say that empathy is the one with the greatest emotional proximity and engagement. And in fact, a common expression that we hear that is really used to define empathy is that it's the capacity and willingness of a person to put himself or herself in the shoes of others. In this case, we are talking about the teacher's capacity and willingness to put themselves in the shoes of their students. Now, why is this important? This is important because research has shown that a safe learning environment is a condition for the possibility of learning. If our learners don't feel safe, if they don't feel that the classroom is a safety zone, then learning will be hampered, if not altogether prevented. If you recall, when we were talking about learning by refraction, we said that one of the meanings of learning by refraction is the process of the students experimenting, going through the process of trial and error, so that any feedback that he or she will receive will be the basis for self-adjustments to improve performance as well as learning. Now, if a student does not feel that the classroom is a safe learning environment, if for whatever reason the teacher is unable to communicate to the students that the classroom is a safe place for them to engage in this trial and error, then learning will be very much hampered. Seth Godin distinguishes safety zone from comfort zone on the one hand and danger zone on the other. And I think it's a very helpful distinction. What Seth Godin is saying is that the safety zone is not the same as the comfort zone. It is possible to venture out of your comfort zone and still remain within the safety zone without trespassing to the danger zone. If we apply that to the classroom, it's the teacher's responsibility to encourage and coax the students to step out of their comfort zones. Because if they don't step out of their comfort zones, there will be very little learning, if any at all. It's important for them to be willing to step out of their comfort zone, to try things out, experiment with new ideas, new concepts, as well as new skills. But they need to be assured that once they step out of their comfort zone, they are not yet in a danger zone. They're still within the safety zone. So empathy is important for the teacher to establish the safety zone beyond the comfort zones of the learners. Now, in Ignatian pedagogy, it is context, we said, that might help the teachers establish empathy in the classroom. If you recall, we said that context is what makes the learning relevant. So that learning must be designed based on prior knowledge of the students and their current mood. So let's unpack this a little bit. So I would operationalize context in terms of three areas. The first would be prior knowledge, so something academic. If you're teaching a particular subject like math or literature, it's important for the teacher to be mindful of what the students already know, what skills they already have, which might be prerequisite to what the teacher is going to talk about. But just as importantly, just as important as this academic context is also the psycho-emotional context of the learners, their current mood, because the current mood of the students can facilitate or hinder learning. But I'd like to add a third area, and this would be the learner's interests, what interests them, what excites them, but also their learning styles. Because different learning styles, these would be instructive for the teacher when the teacher designs the learning experience and plans for the class. As we said, it's important to pay attention to context because whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not, we construct new knowledge based on what we know. And also, our moods color whether we learn at all, and it also affects how we learn. So these are two very important components of context. So when it comes to prior knowledge, what the teacher needs to do is to activate prior knowledge and build on the prior knowledge of the students. It would be great if the teacher would first of all exert an effort to determine what the students already know or don't know about the topic. Here's a very common strategy, very easy to use strategy that many teachers are familiar with. No? It's called the KWL framework, which comes from Ogle. So KWL stands for 3 basic questions that the teacher might want answered in the course of the learning cycle to help her determine context. K stands for know. What do you already know about the topic? What do the students already know about the topic? W stands for what else do the students want to learn about the topic? And finally, L would be after the learning cycle, towards the end of it, what have you learned? So L really becomes an evaluation process, whether they've actually learned what they wanted to learn. So this very simple framework, KWL, an often used strategy, an easy to use strategy by teachers, can help us activate and build on prior knowledge. Just by doing something as simple as this, the teacher can already take into consideration the academic context of the students, namely their prior knowledge. Now, how can the teacher do this? So the teacher can give the students a pretest or actually just conduct an informal discussion among them about what they already know or to try to respond to these questions. So for context, for academic context specifically, a teacher can activate prior knowledge, and after that, the teacher will build on prior knowledge. Knowing what the students already know and knowing what they don't know, the teacher can design the class accordingly. Also related to prior knowledge is misunderstandings. It's important, I think, for teachers to keep an eye on possible misunderstandings that might be lingering in the minds of the students. So being mindful of the context also entails surfacing misunderstandings and correcting misunderstandings. This is a rather funny example in algebra when a student is asked to find x, and of course what the student does is encircle x to say that that's where x is, I've found the x. So I don't know if this is a true story or this is just a joke, but it does, I think, relay the point I'm trying to make here. Aside from prior knowledge, aside from the academic context, we've said that it's also important to address and respond to the current mood of the students, the psycho-emotional context of the students. So it's very possible that the students are happy. It's very possible that they're going through something problematic, or maybe they're just bored to death, or they're just particularly distracted that day. It's important for teachers to be sensitive to the emotional temperature in the classroom, and if it's helpful, to name the elephant in the classroom. If, for example, the majority of the students are distracted because of a school fair the next day, it's important for the teacher to name that elephant in the room and to say something like, well, I know you're all distracted, you're all excited about tomorrow, that's fine, but I'd like to request you just for this class to exert your effort to focus on our subject matter. So name the elephant in the room, name the emojis in the room, and try to identify how the students are feeling and try to guess how those feelings might be affecting the possibility or non-possibility of learning. Now we go to the third area in context. The first, of course, is prior knowledge, and the second is current mood. The third would be learner interests and styles. Let's talk about learner interests first. According to Sousa and Tomlinson, this is a great quote. They say, attaching important content to student interests builds bridges between the student and critical knowledge understanding, and skills. So this is an invitation for the teacher to be creative, to brainstorm about ways and means that whatever content is going to be taught is somehow attached or connected to what the students might be interested in. Some people call this the hook. We have to find the hook so that we can really get the interest of our students. So if our students are interested in sports, perhaps the teacher may want to use something from athletics, from sports, to catch the attention of the students. So learner interest is very much part of context. But also connected to this would be their learning styles. And these questions are worth considering when a teacher is planning a class. When a teacher is taking into consideration the context of the students, don't just look at the prior knowledge or the current mood or even just the interest. The learning styles will also be instructive in terms of how to design an effective class. So here are some questions you may want to ask. Do learners prefer to work alone? Or do learners prefer to work alone? Or do they work better when they collaborate with others in small groups? Do they learn better in a silent room? Or do they actually like it better with music playing in the background? Is a student more the thinking type or the feeling type? And finally, what are cultural differences or gender differences that may need to be considered? These are just some questions that you may want to ask if you're thinking about the learning styles of your students. The point here is not that a teacher should cater to every conceivable learning need or style, but the very fact that a teacher considers the diversity of needs and styles will most likely lead to a more suitable and more effective learning experience that can be offered to the students. The plan that the teacher comes up with would be more suitable and more likely will promote better learning. Now, the context becomes the basis of what in IPP is called prelection. Prelection refers to the itinerary and overview that the teacher gives the students at the start of a class. This is where the teacher tries to motivate the class. Now, you cannot motivate the class. You won't be able to give a very suitable or effective itinerary or relevant overview if you are not aware of the context of the students. So the context, the academic context, the psycho-emotional context, the learning context of the students, all of these become the basis for designing the prelection. So some questions that the prelection will respond to, and as you can see from these questions, you can only respond to them if you know the context of the students, if you know their prior knowledge, if you know their current mood, and their interests and learning styles. So here are the questions. Discuss the question, so what? Why do we need to learn this topic? Why do we need to learn this content? Why do we need to acquire these skills? So you can make the topic more relevant if you are conscious and mindful of your student's context. Why bother? How is it relevant or useful? So discuss the question, so what? Why bother? How is it relevant or useful? So the prelection will be more effective if you're conscious of the context of your students, because you'll be able to answer these questions only if you're aware of their academic context, their psycho-emotional context, as well as their learning context. So in summary, here are questions you may want to ask if you want to address the context of your students. What do students already know about the topic? What misunderstandings might they have that need to be addressed before we even plunge into the topic? So this would be prior knowledge, this would be academic context. How are students feeling today? And how are they feeling about the topic? Are there upcoming or ongoing events or concerns that might be affecting them today? So this is referring to the psycho-emotional context or their current mood. What could be some of the learning styles worth considering as you plan the class when you're deciding on the type of tasks, the types of activities, the form in which you will deliver the content? The learning styles might be instructive. What could possibly catch their attention with regard to the topic? What are they interested about? What are they talking about? What kind of hook can you use to get their attention so that they will get interested in the topic? These are just possible questions that a teacher might want to ask if the teacher wants to build empathy by making sure that he or she is paying attention to the context of the students. So that's as far as the student's context is concerned. But in Ignatian pedagogy, it's not just the context of the learners that's important. The context of the teachers is also important. Whether we like it or not, and whether we know it or not, our context as teachers will affect the way we teach and will affect the learning process in our class. So it's important for us to be mindful of what's going on in our lives. Here's a great quote from one of my favorite authors, Parker Palmer, and he has this to say to teachers, and it's really worth listening to and remembering. He says, "Whoever our students may be, whatever the subject we teach, ultimately, we teach who we are." What a great quote. He reminds us that more than anything else, it's the person of the teacher that makes all the difference. It's the person of the teacher that does the job. That's why it's very important for us to be mindful of what's going on in our person, in our lives. Teachers are some of the busiest people in the world. We are always multitasking. I think the best teachers are able to multitask in class because at the same time as running a class, you are also monitoring what's going on. You are very sensitive to all the subtle cues, all the eye rolls and all the smile or the aha flashes in the eyes of your students. And after class, teachers have to go home and mark papers and so on and so forth. So teachers are some of the busiest people in the world. And sometimes our work really takes over our lives because we are so passionate about our teaching. Many of us are teaching not because it's a means of livelihood, but because it's a source of meaning for our lives. So it's a vocation for us. And as a result, because we're so dedicated to teaching, we end up sometimes forgetting to take care of ourselves. So it's very important in Ignatian pedagogy as well for the teachers to pay attention to their own context. The workload, the deadlines, the stress that a teacher experiences, all of that will take its toll on the teacher and affect the teaching quality. So teachers are being invited to monitor themselves, to engage in self-monitoring, to also name the emojis in the room, the emojis that they're experiencing that can best capture what they're experiencing. And in Ignatian spirituality, we have this gift of the Ignatian Examen. It's a special prayer that St. Ignatius taught the Jesuits. It's a daily prayer. In fact, the recommendation is twice a day. It's also a short prayer. It can be done in 10 to 15 minutes. The idea is just to review the day, to monitor how you felt during the day, the high points and the low points, and to be grateful for all the good things that happened, and to honor the things that did not go quite as well as you wanted them to, but to learn your lessons from those events as well. And of course, since it's a prayer, at the end of the day, it's to give thanks to God for all the blessings and graces, for any enlightenment, for any revelation you might have experienced, for any lessons you may have learned, but also to ask the question, how should I manage what's going on inside me? How should I take care of myself? How can I give myself better care? And how can I improve in managing and taking care of myself? So the prayer of the Ignatian Examen is a very practical, easy to do, short, and helpful prayer. It's meant to be done twice a day for about 10 to 15 minutes, and the idea is for us to just sort of review the day, look at the high points and low points, and savor how we felt, our experience internally, how we felt during those high points and low points, to be grateful for all the things that went well, for all the people who were helpful, who were kind and generous with us, but also to try to draw whatever insights about ourselves, about the world, and also about God that we might learn in the process of reviewing our day. So hopefully, you will consider beginning the habit of praying the Ignatian Examen, because not only will it help you monitor what's going on inside yourself, but it can also help you grow spiritually. So as it turns out, being mindful of context in Ignatian pedagogy isn't just about offering cura personalis to our students. It's also being an agent of cura personalis to ourselves as the teachers. It's also about self-care. Empathy is not only to be offered to our students, empathy should also be offered to the teacher. See you later.